Thank you so much for inviting me here. So I'm a librarian and an archivist. So I thought in the spirit of some of the things that we've been sharing in the chat, I'd be curious to know how many of you have ever been to an archives to do any kind of research. So you can find archives in municipal places. Sometimes they're in universities. Sometimes they're inside public libraries, like the one that is in the Queen's Public Library. And so if you have ever done any research, maybe like family history or research as a student, I would love in the chat if you could just list what archives you've visited. And sometimes we go to archives when we have civil kind of things that we want to know, like maybe we want to know about somebody who used to have the deed to property that we now own, or maybe we need to find marriage records or birth and death certificates, that kind of thing. So I would be really curious if folks are familiar with archives and what places you've accessed archival records. And I think that now, while you're doing that, I will, if it's okay, I will share my screen to just have a couple visuals to share with you. Can everybody see the big Queen's Memory logo here? Okay, great. So the Queen's Memory Project is a community archiving initiative. It was founded in 2010, and our mission is twofold. So one part of our mission is that we push archival collections out to the public to raise awareness and consciousness about local history resources. Let people know, especially what materials are available for free that we all own as part of the Queen's Public Library system that are local history collections. And then, so that's one part, is like raising awareness and pushing materials out so that people know what's available for them in research they might want to do. And then the other half of it is of drawing inward. And we want to encourage people to share their family stories and add to our collections. And it's really in that collecting piece that is what sets the Queen's Memory Project apart from other kind of more like old school, traditional Western ways of collecting and archiving materials, which really are founded in one, a kind of passive model, where as an archive, you're waiting for people to show up with boxes of their family's stuff or their important papers and say, I'm a really important community member, and my family's history is the most important history. And so therefore, you should keep my family's records and you should make them available for posterity so that everybody can learn about us and our great deeds. So that's kind of like the old, Western civilization model for archival practice, is that you wait for these people who are part of an existing power structure to show up and reinforce the same narratives that you are catching in every history book that you see in mainstream tellings of how things have unfolded over centuries, right? So with the Queen's Memory Project, we fit into a couple different theoretical models that are kind of new-ish to the archival practice. So one is that we are a post-custodial archive. So what that means is that we don't necessarily try to separate people from their things. So we are trying to digitize things that people bring to us, send them back with digital copies of their own materials, and then also keep those digital copies for the public record so that people can access them digitally. And we're not trying to, keep things necessarily like out of communities where they originate and put them safely, in a vault somewhere. So it's a way of working with community and making sure that people have the information that they need so that they can keep their own materials safe, And if they want to have an institution serve in a preservation kind of role and do, put things into a climate controlled vault, that we can arrange for that. But it's much more about helping people to capture their own family's history. So a big part of what we do for the Queen's Memory Project is we engage with oral history practices. So we're really trying to get the histories of people who maybe don't have a whole lot of written records. And a lot of times in Queens, especially, we have so many families living here who do not go back 10 generations where they have like a family estate and they have boxes and boxes of materials. It's like people have just arrived here. And so when you come, you don't necessarily bring a ton of records with you. And so what you're carrying inside your head, right? You're carrying stories, and if those don't get recorded, then they're gone. So that's really the kind of work that we're trying to do. So we work in that in that community archiving kind of space where we're trying to be driven by people who live in Queens and who we engage with as partners in history making to help us to understand what things are really important to record about the people who live, work, and go to school in Queens. So this is a picture from one of our in-person events, and I'm very happy to say that as of this month, we have just started doing in-person events again. It feels wonderful to be with people in person. As somebody who's doing this kind of work, it's like, that is what actually we're in it for, is to like meet people and hear their stories. So we've been doing a ton of work on Zoom, and that's fine. But a big part of our practice is meeting people in person. And so we're very happy that those kind of events have started again. And we have like over 900 interviews that we've collected since 2010. And most of those interviews are interviews that are collected by community members who we do a training with to help them to learn how to conduct a good interview. And then they interview a family member or a neighbor or somebody from their religious community, maybe a teacher, maybe a coworker, somebody who they believe has a voice that should be part of history. And I'm going to just talk briefly about some of the ways in which we interact with community members. So we do a lot of projects with educators. We put ourselves in classrooms. Sometimes that's like in this example where we worked with an undergraduate class of sociologists who went out into the field and conducted interviews about how migration has impacted culinary traditions and families. These were fascinating interviews. There were a lot of recipes that were shared. And when you talk to people about their food, it gets soulful and it gets deep really quickly, because what we eat and who we make that food with and who we make it for, all of that is really core to a lot of things that we care deeply about. And it connects with holidays that we celebrate, etc. So then all of those interviews that we did with those students all came to us, and we keep them in our archives and we make them accessible for future researchers. We also engage in a lot of crowdsourcing activities. So sometimes those are in person and we have scanning days. This started right after Hurricane Sandy because we knew that some of our patrons of the Queens Public Library who were living in Broad Channel and in the Rockaways had lost a lot of physical photographs, and that the things that they had managed to kind of dry out and get to a good enough state that they could bring them to us, it was time to scan those things. So we brought our scanners to the Broad Channel Library and also to the Rockaways, and people came in with their photographs. And sometimes they were these beautiful, amazing historical photos like this one of this diver. And it was really documenting a maritime history in Queens and really looking at how people used to make their livelihoods on the water as they do today. So we sometimes have these in-person events, and sometimes we have projects like the Queen's Memory COVID-19 project that we launched in April of 2020, where we encourage people to share their photographs, their written experiences, their recorded interviews on audio and video, just telling us about what their experiences were of the pandemic. And we had many hundreds of submissions through that project, and we populated a map of Queens that just shows, people from all over the borough sharing their kind of snapshots of experiencing the pandemic. So whether it's digital or whether it's in person, we really love doing these calls to action and these invitations to participate, because we know that sometimes people have a whole life history that they want to share, and sometimes they have something that's more brief or something that is thematic that they really want to share. And so we want to make room for people who have all different kind of levels of involvement and desire to share different amounts of their story. We also work a lot with artists. We found that working with teaching artists and social practice artists and otherwise community engaged artists is some of the birthplace of our most creative and enjoyable ways that we interact with the public. And we've learned a lot from the artists who work with us about how to make community gatherings really fun, and how to get people talking about deep things that really reach into their values and into their beliefs about the world and about themselves. So Claro de los Reyes is a very wonderful performance artist. He has a theater company called the Atlantic Pacific Theater Company, and he did a project that was funded by the Laundromat Project, and it was really tracing, kind of connecting these different Filipino communities throughout Queens and getting people actually meeting each other and talking to each other who didn't even realize the other ones were around. And he did these interviews. So we worked with him a little bit to train him and a couple of his volunteers, and then they did these beautiful interviews that are in our collections. So we got really wonderful content out of it, and he got a preservation partner so that he as an individual artist doesn't have the responsibility of keeping these things on preservation servers and making sure that they are safe for the long run. So that's really the way that we like to partner with our community partners, is by providing that service. We also have projects that are special topics. So around the 25th anniversary of the Queen's Pride Parade, we did a special LGBTQ activist project where we were really interested in interviewing some of the people who started the parade, who were still very much active in organizing the parade at that point, because it hadn't been that long. And then also engaging with a next generation of activists who were really pushing, a new and exciting agenda of items, and working in neighborhoods that had not previously been activated in LGBTQ plus issues, activism issues before. So this is a picture of Mohammed Q. Amin, who I'm sure is familiar to this group, who was one of the first people that we interviewed for the project. And what we found through doing work like this is that we were able to recruit some really excellent volunteers who didn't necessarily come to us because they were from the library and archives world, but who were very happy to learn how to conduct a really good interview. But what their interest was in the topic itself. And so we have people who were interested in LGBTQ history and a history of activism. And so then they were happy to learn how to be really good interviewers. And then they've stuck with us, and we've had some really great engagements with folks who came in maybe through a special project like this, but then continued on and did other interviews with other populations. And then we also, and this is the thing that is really kind of happening right now, is that we're in the middle of publishing our 3rd season of our podcast. Each season is 10 episodes long. This is a picture from one of our listening parties. That's Luna Ranjit, who might also be familiar to people in this meeting. She was featured in our 1st season of our podcast as one of the guests, as was Tara Madathari, who's sitting right next to her in the white jacket. And when we had a listening party at our Jackson Heights Library, we were able to hear the episode and then have a talkback session with some of the people who had appeared in the episode and ask them some questions. And it was also an opportunity for them to bring their family and their friends to be able to celebrate the episode's launch. So we continue to do these listening parties. This season of the podcast is entirely focused on the stories of Asian American communities in Queens. And we have, out of the 10 episodes, the introductory episode and the conclusion episode are just in English, but the interior 8 are all produced in 2 languages. So they're in English, and then they're in one of the 8 most popular Asian American languages in Queens. So this week, the episode that we premiered is in Nepali, and it's also in English. And we're going to be having a celebration on Thursday at 6 p.m. at Diversity Plaza. And we'll be hearing from representatives from Adhikar and from the United Sherpa Association. And we'll be hearing from the 2 producers who produced the episode, both in Nepali and in English. And so we hear in the episode about a domestic worker from Nepal, and then also from somebody who owns Pasang's barbershop that's right in Diversity Plaza, who is also Nepali and runs this local business and has a really interesting story because he's a barber by day in Queens, and by night he's a Nepali poet and musician who's like a famous popular like pop artist. And so it's like all this collision of identities that people have when they're living in more than one place. And so anyway, I would encourage you all to listen to the podcast. It's really wonderful. I can say that because I didn't produce it. We hired really wonderful producers to create these stories. And then we are having these events every week now to celebrate the different episodes. And lastly, I want to talk about some of the partnerships that we do. And one of the wonderful ones that we did all the way back in 2013 was with the Queens General Assembly. And we have interviews with many of the members from that time. And I wanted to be able to play a clip for you guys because I wanted to give you a sense of what it is that it can be captured when we have 2 different Queens General Assembly members speaking with each other and thinking about what they want to get on the record about themselves and also about the work that they do in the Queens General Assembly. But I know it's also 7:20. So I wonder if maybe, Susie, should we listen to the clip or do you want to?
Yes,
okay.
Definitely.
Okay. I love that picture of the 2 of them too. You can just tell that they just love each other. So this is our platform where we post audiovisual materials. And I'm going to start playing this clip, and I want you to give me an indication of if the audio is coming through, because sometimes that's an issue. Okay. Can you hear it? No. Okay. So let me stop sharing. And I think that if I share again, but say that I want to share, share sound. Okay. Let me try this again.
And others, but
do you hear it now?
There was this sense of openness.
So let me get it back to the beginning.
Wanting to hear. Joined the General Assembly were very open and wanted to hear. Some people needed more convincing than others, but there was this sense of openness of wanting to hear. And I have to really commend the borough president, Helen Marshall, for having this vision. Because, you can tell from all her years as a teacher and as just somebody that's out there in the community that she saw this trend and she lived this trend and she was part of this trend because of her own background. Mm-hmm. And she saw a need to create this dialogue, and we're so fortunate to have been part of that vision because it's not it was something that she knew wasn't being said, and things had to be developed in a way. She created a structure for all of these unlikely people to get together, right? So the likelihood that I would have run into you outside of an environment like this, or we would have run into one of the rabbis or one of the people associated with another community in Queens, was unlikely without her creating this structure. And so it was just great to hear about the kinds of things that you were doing in your community, because it gave me a sense of the hope that you had for your community.
Mhm.
You know, you were out there trying to make those day-to-day improvements in the area you live in, and talking to people. And what you wound up doing was creating this whole core of people that went out and try to drive the discussion on this thing,
Mhm.
and to help, I think, in many ways, lay or frame issues for people that didn't look at these issues from the perspective that we had actually developed at the General Assembly. So it's pretty terrific. And then to hear you come in and talk about the storefronts and the kinds of things that were happening in the commercial strip in your area, and then somebody else saying, wow, that's almost exactly the same story in my neighborhood. And then, it was, so there was a sense of common issues on all levels. And like you, I really do agree that we found that people care about deeply about things: quality of life, education, wellness of their family. And I have learned a lot too. I came into many of the meetings in the beginning of the General Assembly feeling somewhat skeptical, saying to myself, okay, this is just another one of these feel good, another brotherhood organization and so on. But as time went on, I really felt that people were open to listening. They may have come in feeling somewhat like I did, but they said to themselves, no, I'm going to sit here and at least listen. I really was grateful to have been thought about to participate in a project like this. I have to say that I was a little skeptical, but I decided that I was going to get involved, partly because I felt that the Asian voice had to be heard. And and because I was born in this country, I felt that to some extent I might be able to articulate some things a little more clearly. And I also wanted to have other people meet an Asian person that might be different than a stereotype they might have in mind.
Mhm.
But having known Susie for a while at that point, I knew that she would really do a great job facilitating this. And I really felt that the borough president was somebody who was a person of goodwill, and she was sincere about this. This was just not some kind of a PR thing. It wasn't just one of those things that officials do, that
Mhm.
she really hoped that something would come out of it.
I'll end it there.
Wow.
Was that a blast from the past, Susie?
Natalie, thank you very, very much. This was incredible. Thank you for presenting the Queen's Memory Project to our group as the amazing resource that it is, and for the surprise at the end. Had no idea you were going to share a bit of our history with the current group. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And what I hope is that we'll have some interviews with the current cohort that we will be able to add to our collections as well.